This video is going to tell you how to do the more effective brake service. So all the old cars, especially cars that are more than 10 years old, the brake service will be one of the tasks that is required. So when your brake requires service, that is the time that you will see the car mileage per tank, or the fuel efficiency, MPG, or kilometer per liter. Those efficiency will drop. So that's one of the symptoms. Another possibility is that when you brake, the steering is vibrating. And third possibility, if that a brake is near stuck, then potentially you will smell a metallic burning smell from the wheels. So this video I'm going to demonstrate what is my own preference when doing the brake service, because of you might not want to spend so much time, or because you just want to find out exactly which brake that requires service. So typically when you go to the mechanic will just service all four brakes together or four wheels together. But if you want to do yourself, then you might want to figure out exactly which wheel require the brake service rather than service all four. Certainly if you have time, you can do that as a preventive measure. But sometimes if this is time sensitive, or you want to save some money in buying the parts, lubricants, and tools, or what so on, then you can follow this technique to figure out exactly which wheel or which brake caliper requires service, and then you just service that specific one. So one of the simplest way that I will use is by touching the disc brake itself. So if you have a drum brake, certainly you cannot touch it, but if you have a disc brake, then you can do that. So to do that, firstly you need to get the brake caliper, the brake disc cool down. So where is the brake disc? So this is the brake disc. It's the metal flat plate behind the rim. It's one metallic disc shape. That's a so-called disc. Typically, most of the cars have the front as a disc, and the rear brake could be a disc or brake. But typically now, more and more cars become a disc. So this is not so common to see the drum brake anymore. So firstly is do a quick touch with your finger. You can wear a glove or cover it with a piece of metal cloth. So then by going through the cloth or the glove, you do a quick touch on the disc. So you just kind of get a feel of the temperature of the disc. As long as it's good to the touch or cold, then you can do the next stage. So the next stage is drive the car for about a minute to 5 minutes around the neighborhood, on the street. When you come back, you will certainly apply some brake on your car. So by pressing on the brake, when you make a 1 minute journey or 5 minutes journey around the area and come back, then repeat the same thing again. Tap lightly on the disc brake. So the reason why I ask you to tap is because sometimes if the caliper or the disc system, entire disc braking system has an issue, this metal plate or the disc brake could be very, very hot. So by tapping it, regardless how hot it is, unless it's burning red, you should be able to feel it. So if the temperature is okay to the touch, then you can hold it much longer to get an actual temperature feeling. So what's so important about that? So the reason why I need to do that is because you have four discs here and four wheels here, and four brake system and caliper here. So exactly which one has the highest temperature, that is the one that you need to service. And that is the only disc and only brake that you need to remove it and do the necessary lubrications and rebuild and so on. So instead of spending time of doing everything in one go and spend a couple hours on doing that, as well as spending a couple hours So just now I talk about do a quick test and save money, identify which brakes require service, and only service that specific one. This saves you the time and money, as well as any bullshit from a dealer or manufacturer's document to tell you service it every 3 years, 5 years, so on. So next thing is exactly find out how bad is the situations. Do you need to do it immediately, or you can further delay? So to determine that, you will require to jack up the car. So typically your car have a jacking tool, and assuming that is what you have, and you jack it up until the wheel is a little bit higher from the ground. So jack the car up a little bit. Use a wood block or something that is tall. It can be a battery, it can be a brick on the other 2 or 3 wheels, so that the car will not move. And subsequently, put your hand, the gear selections away from the P, from the park. It can be R, can be N, can be D, doesn't matter. So the reason for doing that is so that you can turn the wheel. So back to the wheel end. Then after that it's free, then you can try to turn the wheel. So for this car, it is seriously stuck. So I cannot turn it by hand or 2 hands. So the more serious it is, the more force you need to turn it. So how poorly or how bad the stuck disc or brake is. So the next thing is by hand is a little bit serious or issue. You still can get along with it and take your time, a week or 2 or a month, and go to a mechanic or do it yourself to do the service. If you cannot turn by hand. So what about if I turn by tool? So this is it can move. So in other words, the car is still very drivable, and the longer the range, the more force you have to put. That means the more serious it is. So for this, about 1.5 inch, about 18 inches long range, this is certainly needed immediate attention, because it is grabbing to the disc. So that's all about this recording. Once you determine that by hand, by tool, and you certainly have to do the repair on this wheel only. The rest of the 3, if they are good, can turn by hand, then no service required. So the typical service that you need is to potentially replicate the slider pin. Regardless of BMW or Honda, there's a slider pin mechanism inside the brake caliper itself. Second possibility, if the car is much older, like more than 10 years old, then potentially the piston that's pushing the brake pad, that piston is required to remove and replace another one. In my case, I will just to sand it off, remove all any rust or uneven surface. The rust build up, you will have a bump, so I will smooth out the bumps and put back the piston. So this is another way to save the money on the brake repair. So this is BMW E46 front brake caliper. So once you remove the wheel, this is how it looks like. I'm going to do a brake caliper service job that involves lubricating the pin, the sliding pin, as well as the piston itself. So the piston is the one that is a big cylindrical shape metal rod that, or is a cup that is pushing the caliper and indirectly pressing the brake pad towards the brake disc and stop the car. So there's only one, so for this service, because I have to do that two component to access that, the slider pin is quite easy. Is right next to the bleeding nipple. So there is a small cup that covering this hole, and you have to remove that in order to access the slider pin, which is using a hex Allen key to loosen it. So you might need a wrench with a hex key as well. This should be size 8 mm. In order to that will be easier to remove it, or you can use a typical L-shaped wrench. L-shaped Allen key, a hex key to remove it. So the difference between that two is typically for a car that is 10 years and above, and this slider pin is a little bit stuck or dry. So to remove it, when you put Allen key behind it, it could be impossible to turn by hand. Whereas if you use a much longer wrench, then that is become an easier job. If that become an issue, then you have to use a pipe to put on top of it to turn it. Make sure that your Allen key is strong enough to support it. A good material, otherwise it could break as well. So next I will have to remove this spring by putting it away from it. So the slider pin is by putting a screwdriver here, a flathead screwdriver along this end, and press against it so that this hook is pushed out and released, and then you can remove it. So just now we turn the wheel we turn the wheel with the tire and the rim on, and suddenly if you do the service and you want to do an inspection whether the issue is resolved, you can also turn the disc by hand. Typically a good brake system with a slider pin or the piston, you should be able to push it by hand. Certainly that the parking gear has to be removed from the park positions to the N or R or D in order for this to be able to move, which I already done that earlier. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to remove the slider pin. For this BMW, or regardless any series, this is E46 specific. The slider pin is here. So once you loosen it, you can both ends. Two of them, then this bracket itself can be removed. So let me put it down. So look at the slider pin here. So how to determine whether the slider pin is a problem? The easiest way is remove the slider pin, put it down, and then try to turn it. So if you can turn by hand, that means it is a slider pin. Okay. If you cannot turn by hand, that means there is another piston inside the caliper itself. So the most likely the piston requires service or replacement. So it is about $10 to $60 repair for that one, and this is a couple dollars. I guess BMW charge for $10 or so, so it can be replaced as well if you do not want to renew it. So this is impossible to be damaged, to put it this way. So you can use a sandpaper, start with say grit 200, then 300, 400, 800 to polish it. And then you can also use the car polish or the rim polish. This kind of grease or polish compound to smooth them out the surface. So it's very important to have a very smooth surface because it is for sliding purpose. So it has to be able to slide very easily. You cannot just sand with 200, otherwise it will be too coarse and cannot slide easily. So typically for BMW per se, this slider pin will not rust. My car is about close to 20 years now, so it will not rust. What I typically need to do is just remove the hardened grease by plastic or by wood, because both plastic and wood they will not scratch the metal surface so easily, and those hardened grease can be easily pry off, and after that then wipe it off with a newspaper, paper towel, or so on, so forth. So the BMW recommendation for E46, E48, and so on is apply it dry. So that is one way to solve it. So to summarize it, remove it, two of them, and turn the disc by hand. Can turn, cannot turn. Can turn, then this problem. If cannot turn, then some other things you have to look into. So next, I'm going to remove this bracket. And come back with later. So just now I was saying trying to remove this brake caliper with the one that with the brake pad. I try to use a flathead screwdriver to pry it off, but it doesn't move at all. So next I use a much longer pry bar to pry it off by putting in between and try to push it away. And I can slowly to push it out. So this is the typical pattern that the piston itself could be potentially require rebuild, service, polish, sanding, rust build up, and so on. So the caliper is removed, the caliper that with the brake pad. So I have removed the brake pad from it by sliding it out and pulling it out. So that is the easy part. As I mentioned, once you remove this caliper, put it inside, then you should be able to easily turn the disc itself by hand. So this for BMW, the front disc is only attached by one single hex bolt, 7mm bolt. So once you remove that bolt, you should be able to remove the entire disc together. So for this brake service, I do not need to remove it, so I can leave it attached. So if you cannot turn this disc easily by hand, let's say when you try to turn it, it has a sound. So that is also potentially very hard to turn. Then the problem is not in the brake system itself. It will be the problem with the wheel bearing here. So typically when wheel bearing go bad, one symptom is it typically has a sound because the little metal ball inside is crushed, or the mounting holding the mounting assembly, holding the metal ball is broken, so that it directly causes the ball to shift, and that also when you turn the disc, and then inside will be the bearing, and when the bearing turn, and it will make a noise, especially you do a 360-degree turn. So sometimes it's the faster you turn, the louder the noise is. So that is another possibility that causing the wheel to hard to turn or seize. But for BMW, that is less likely compared to brake issues. For most of the car, it will be the brake that causing the wheel to stuck or hard to turn, rather than the wheel bearing itself. That is a typical condition. So just want to explain about the wheel bearing problem that could cause the wheel to stuck, and then I will continue back to the brake system itself. So let me point to this little cylinder. So this cup is the piston, so-called. It's a hollow in the middle, exactly like a cup shape, and with a rubber boot that is holding it in place. This is the one that pushing the brake pad to the disc to stop the car. And so this cup itself, behind it is just brake fluid, or for E46 it will be a transmission fluid. And this is the one that causing the piston to stuck.